In 2005, 21-year-old Ashley Marie Parlier left her family home in Battle Creek, Michigan, after an argument with her parents about her pregnancy. She never returned. Early in the investigation, detectives focused on her father as a potential suspect. Despite questioning friends and Ashley's boyfriend, authorities were unable to gather enough evidence to make an arrest, and the case eventually went cold. The uncertainty haunted Ashley's family for years. Tragically, both of her parents passed away in 2020 before any answers could be found. A major break came in 2021 when Harold Holman, already in custody for the deaths of 2 women in Pennsylvania, confessed during questioning that he had taken Ashley's life. He told investigators that after an argument with Ashley, he struck her in the head with a piece of wood, rendering her unconscious. Panicking, he placed her in his car, drove her to a wooded area in Newton Township, and struck her again to ensure she wouldn't regain consciousness. He then buried her body. Ashley's sister Nicole Campine said she believed Ashley was pregnant with Holman's child. Nicole described Ashley as a loving and caring person, but noted that she had the mental capacity of a 12-year-old, something Holman exploited. In court, Nicole confronted Holman, telling him, "You took the life of my sister, but you ended so much more. You stole a piece of us every day since the day she went missing." Nicole was supported in court by Emily Corbin and Tasha Fista, whose sisters Erica Schultz and Tiana Phillips were also victims of Holman. Tasha offered words of solidarity to Nicole's family, saying, "They need to know that I am here for them, that I know how they feel, and together we will make it through it." Emily added, "The most important thing for the 3 of us is that the light of our sisters keeps shining." In April 2023, Holman, already serving 2 life sentences, was sentenced to an additional 37.5 to 60 years in prison. For Nicole, the biggest relief was that her father was no longer viewed as a suspect. "We have a name, we have an answer," she said. Although Holman has promised several times to lead investigators to Ashley's remains, he has never followed through. Nicole said, "It's almost like he gets to have a day out in the sun. My sister does not get that ever again." When asked by the judge if he had anything to say, Holman simply replied, "No." In a separate case, justice was finally served for the 1987 killing of 87-year-old Edna Laffman in Oxford Township, Pennsylvania. She had been beaten, indecently assaulted, and suffocated. Pills were forced down her throat. Initially, authorities believed the attacker was a stranger seen in the neighborhood that day. But in 1988, police arrested and prosecutors convicted Barry Laffman, a 24-year-old distant relative of the victim, who had an IQ of 70 and functioned at the level of a 10-year-old. Barry spent 16 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Numerous inconsistencies existed between his confession and the actual crime scene evidence. Investigative journalist Peter Shellum highlighted these issues in a series of reports. His work also uncovered the original biological evidence, which had been mishandled and overlooked for years. The samples were later tested using advanced DNA techniques, proving Barry was not the perpetrator. Barry was released in 2003 and officially exonerated in 2004. In a bittersweet resolution to the decades-old case, the true killer Edna, their actual attacker, was finally sentenced after pleading guilty nearly 20 years after Barry's wrongful imprisonment. Attorney Brian Sinnott highlighted the issues surrounding the original confession in the Edna Laffman case, describing it as somewhat questionable. According to the district attorney, the police recorded Barry Laffman's confession in a highly flawed manner. Instead of conducting a proper interrogation with clear questions and answers, the officers told Barry what they believed had happened, and he simply responded with one-word answers. Sinnott remarked, "I do not think any reputable police agency would use that technique today." Several weeks after the crime, Pennsylvania State Police Trooper Jack Holtz questioned Barry and told him that a fingerprint found on a cigarette pack at the crime scene had a whorl pattern. Holtz then pointed out that Barry also had a whorl pattern on his right index finger. What Holtz failed to explain was that around 30% of all human fingerprints have a whorl pattern, and that fingerprint experts do not rely on general patterns like this for identification. Statistically, it was unsurprising and nearly meaningless that Barry had a whorl pattern on one of his fingers. Still, the implication was enough to pressure Barry into confessing. He stated that he ended Edna's life on August 12th, even though a neighbor had seen her alive in her yard on August 13th. Despite these glaring inconsistencies, Barry Laffman was convicted and spent 16 years in prison. Investigative journalist Peter Shellum played a key role in uncovering the truth. He pointed out the discrepancies in the confession and worked tirelessly to track down the original biological evidence, which had been mishandled and forgotten over the years. Though Peter passed away in 2009 after 23 years at the Patriot News, his efforts helped pave the way for a renewed investigation. In 2018, with advancements in DNA technology, the samples Peter had uncovered were sent to a genealogy lab. The lab traced the DNA to someone with the last name Laffman or Sp. Investigators then learned that Christopher Spielman had lived next door to Edna about a decade before her death. When police first interviewed Spielman on May 18, 2021, he denied knowing anything about the crime or that Barry had been convicted for it. He also denied having any relationship with Edna. However, He unintentionally gave a crucial clue by admitting he was a chronic smoker. A Marlboro cigarette box had been found at the scene, along with multiple cigarette butts in different rooms of Edna's home. Despite the fact that Edna herself did not smoke, Spielman voluntarily provided a DNA sample to prove his innocence. The test confirmed that he was the true perpetrator. In July 2021, after being presented with the DNA results, Spielman confessed and admitted that he acted alone. On June 22, 2023, 59-year-old Christopher Spielman was sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison by Adams County Judge Thomas Campbell. He pleaded guilty to third-degree murder and burglary and entered a no-contest plea to a charge of indecent assault. The quick plea and sentencing brought long-overdue closure to a tragic, cold case and corrected a decades-long miscarriage of justice. Justice Sennett commented on the outcome of the Edna Laffman case, saying, "Today's plea and sentence finally brings a conclusion to this unique case. Were it not for the exhaustive efforts of investigators and those involved in the genealogy research, the victim's family might never have received any measure of closure for this remarkably heinous and violent attack," he continued. "It is clear that years of effort went into unmasking the cowardly perpetrator of an 87-year-old woman, someone who hid behind his actions for so long while another man languished in prison for the crime Christopher Spielman ultimately committed." In a press release, Attorney Sennett echoed the sentiment, stating, "No case I know of better proves the relentless efforts of law enforcement in justly and honestly apprehending and holding those responsible for their crimes. No amount of time will stop the pursuit of justice for victims. Spielman will not be eligible for parole until 2046. Another case, though cold for a shorter time, ended in a similarly decisive sentence. In 2019, Bobby Lynn Moose, a mother of two from Nelson House, Manitoba, Canada, disappeared. She was last seen on October 1st, when her sister dropped her off at a Walmart in Thompson. Over 2 weeks later, her body was discovered in an industrial area of the city. Her coat was still on, but her leggings had been pulled down and her underwear was ripped. An autopsy revealed multiple abrasions and contusions on her head and face, a skull fracture around her eye, and at least 3 brain bleeds that caused swelling and ultimately led to her death. Despite extensive investigation, the case went cold briefly. In 2021, 53-year-old Jack Clarence Flett was arrested. His defense attorney, Saul Simmons, described a tragic background. Flett's parents were both residential school survivors who struggled to show love, and Flett endured abuse from family members. To cope, he turned to substances, which often led to violent outbursts. Crown attorney Brent Davidson acknowledged Flett's troubled upbringing but emphasized that it didn't excuse the brutality of the crime. "Bobby's death is a prime example of his violence while drinking," he said. "The actions perpetrated by Mr. Flett were vicious and callous, and she suffered greatly while fighting for her life." Although Flett was initially charged with first-degree murder, both the Crown and defense agreed to a manslaughter charge, to which he pleaded guilty. One of the reasons for the reduced charge was the nature of the evidence. The only link between Flett and the crime was his DNA, which was given voluntarily but under questionable circumstances. Flett may have had low blood sugar when he agreed to the test, which could have impaired his judgment. He was shown a form outlining how his DNA could be used, but due to his poor vision, he may not have been able to read it. Additionally, Flett wasn't clearly informed during the recorded interview that his DNA would be compared with samples from Bobby and the crime scene. Police claimed he was told off-camera. Davidson stressed that without the DNA evidence there would have been no case at all. If the DNA was excluded, there would be no prosecution, no life sentence, and no justice. Flett's harsh upbringing and the uncertainty around the DNA evidence contributed to the decision to reduce the charge. On January 16, 2023, he was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 7 years. Bobby's family remains devastated. Her sisters continue to grieve, heartbroken by the loss of a beloved sibling whose life was taken far too soon. Linkle, one of Bobby Lynn Moose's sisters, gave a heartfelt victim impact statement during Jack Clarence Flett's sentencing. "She did not deserve to endure all the horrible things that happened to her that night," she said. Directly addressing Flett, she added, "I accept that you pled guilty, and I am sorry for what happened, but I don't know if I can forgive you. Maybe you can ask the Lord Jesus to forgive you." Another sister, Diane Moose, described Bobby's generous spirit. "She was a good mother, a good sister, a good cousin, a good friend. Bobby will be in our hearts always, as she was loved." Flett had already spent 1.5 years in custody before sentencing, making him eligible to apply for parole in 5.5 years. However, many family members voiced deep concern about their safety if he were released. Crown attorney Brent Davidson reminded the court that parole eligibility does not guarantee release. The final decision lies with the Parole Board of Canada. During sentencing, Judge Gerald Chartier urged Flett to take advantage of all available resources while serving his time. "You really need to avail yourself, use whatever resources you can get while you serve your sentence to try to grapple with these serious problems that you have, and that you've inherited." In a separate case dating back to 2004, another long-untouched tragedy saw a shocking confession. On the morning of April 28, 2004, At around 6:30 a.m., Cindy Christensen and Brian Norton went to check on their friend, 48-year-old Tommy Hope, at his home in Camden, Missouri. No one had heard from him for several days, which was unusual. After getting no response at the door, Cindy climbed through a window and discovered Tommy's lifeless body lying face down in a pool of blood. Shaken, they went to a nearby friend's house and called 911. Brian told the dispatcher, "He is lying face down, but then there's blood on the carpet and stuff too, right around his face area. Like he has been bleeding from his head." Camden Police Chief Jeff Bockham recalled the grim scene. "I walked over to the body, and at that point, I could see his shirt was soaked with blood. There was also stiffening of the body. He had obviously been there for some time." Investigators used luminol to reveal bloody footprints leading to the window where the suspect had exited. Fingerprints were also recovered from the window. An autopsy determined Tommy had died from 8 stab wounds to his torso and left arm, along with a deep laceration on his neck. The medical examiner estimated he died 3 or 4 days earlier, likely on the night of April 24 or the morning of April 25. Tommy D. Hope was born in 1955 in Texas and was one of 3 siblings. Their childhood was marked by severe neglect, with parents who often left them alone for days. Eventually, the Hope children were placed in foster care, where Tommy endured further abuse. According to his friend Brenda McCabe, there was a lot of abuse in those homes. He was neglected. He was beaten. As soon as he was old enough, Tommy joined the military. After his service, he worked odd jobs and eventually settled in Camden, Missouri, where he found companionship in the local bar scene. Friends told police that Tommy used drugs to cope with past traumas. Both from his youth and his time in the military, he always had some substances, said Chief Bockham, mainly user amounts. People would come over and party together and use his stuff. There was a variety. Investigators learned from Tommy's friend Patricia Strauss that he had recently been in a relationship with a married woman named Clara Rector. Clara's husband, Jason, was aware of the affair and furious. "Tom told me just a few days before he was killed that Jason had threatened him," Patricia said. "He told Tom to stay away from Clara or he would be sorry." Clara, born in 1976 in California, had a similarly troubled upbringing. She was removed from a dysfunctional home as a child and later adopted. Her adoptive family eventually moved to the Lake of the Ozarks region. At 19, Clara married, but her first husband tragically died in a car crash soon after. She was pregnant at the time. The loss devastated her and she began using substances to cope. Eventually, she married Jason Rector, with whom she had 2 children. What began as a relationship built on shared pain and addiction between Clara and Tommy would spiral into a deadly ending, one that would take years to fully unravel. Jason and Clara Rector were both regular users of substances for years. Eventually, Jason managed to get sober, but Clara continued to struggle with addiction. In Tommy Hope, Clara found someone who understood her pain and a willing companion to use substances with. At one point, she left Jason and moved in with Tommy. However, in 2003, she entered rehab and reconciled with her husband. Despite this, Clara later admitted to investigators that she hadn't maintained her sobriety and was secretly meeting up with Tommy to use substances behind Jason's back. When investigators interviewed Jason, he was candid about his resentment toward Tommy. He blamed him for Clara's continued drug use and admitted that he had warned Tommy to stay away from her. According to prosecutor Brian Katie, Jason told investigators, "I didn't do it, but I'm glad he's deceased." Both Jason and Clara provided alibis for each other, claiming they were together during the time of Tommy's murder. With no physical evidence or credible leads, the case went cold for nearly a decade. In April 2013, a new development shifted everything. Lieutenant Scott Hines of the Camden County Sheriff's Office was called to Camden Bible Baptist Church after Pastor Jerry Slay reported being stalked by Clara Rector. Slay claimed Clara had been leaving him disturbing messages, some on his car windshield, and had even given him a notebook filled with sexual fantasies about him. After he rejected her advances, she became threatening. Pastor Slay recounted a chilling interaction. "Jerry, if you tell the law what you know about me, I will destroy you. I will effing destroy you," Clara told him. She was referring to a prior counseling session during which she had confessed to killing a man. Concerned for the safety of himself and his family, Slay went to the authorities. He told detectives that Clara had once opened up about her relapse. "She started telling me how she had left Jason and the kids and was using again. Got mixed up with this guy, and then she just put her head down and said, and I ended him." Slay encouraged her to go to the police, but she refused. On April 21, 2013, 36-year-old Clara Rector was arrested and charged with harassment and stalking. Detectives who had worked Tommy Hope's murder case were brought in to question her. After discussing the current charges, they turned the conversation to the unsolved murder from 2004. Clara seemed relieved. She confessed. She told detectives that on the night of Tommy's murder, she had snuck out of her house because she wanted to get high. When she arrived at Tommy's home, he initially refused to let her in, so she climbed through a window. After using the last of his dwindling supply of drugs, the two got into an argument. Clara said she snapped She grabbed a butcher knife, jumped on Tommy's back, and slashed his throat. Then she continued to stab him multiple times. Describing the moment, she said, "I started like, I hate you, and he was standing there against the wall." Her confession brought a tragic and violent chapter to a close one that had haunted Tommy's friends and family for nearly a decade. During her confession, Clara Rector recalled Tommy Hope's final moments. "He was like, I think you are ending me. I think I'm losing my life," she said. Then, he collapsed. Clara explained that after the attack, she took the knife and Tommy's wallet and fled out the window. When she returned home, Jason was waiting. After hearing what she had done, he helped her dispose of any incriminating evidence. On April 24th, 9 years to the day of Tommy Hope's death, both Clara and Jason Rector were arrested. Clara was charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action, while Jason faced a felony charge of tampering with physical evidence. However, the charge against Jason was later dropped as the statute of limitations had expired on November 10, 2014. Clara was sentenced to 15 years in prison. In the years that followed, she claimed to have found strength and healing through her Christian faith. On her blog, Clara warned others about the dangers of substance use and wrote, "I believe that Jesus lost his life on the cross for the redemption of all people. Believe in me." While she succeeded in ending her addiction, she ultimately served time for taking the life of a man who had once been a friend, in another cold case that took decades to solve. Authorities in Sunnyvale, California used DNA analysis to identify the man responsible for the death of 18-year-old Elena Estela Mena. On October 27, 1979, Elena was working as a security guard at an office building on Dini Drive in Santa Clara County. She was stabbed multiple times during an attempted sexual assault. The attacker fled when an office worker unexpectedly entered the building, interrupting the crime. Despite initial efforts,